Hi everyone, it's your dad here. A couple things before we begin. First, while this video is about Elden Ring, it contains 0 spoilers for Shadow of the Erdtree. This project has been in gestation long enough that when I wrote the script, we didn't even have a trailer for the DLC. This video is also about the movie Mulholland Drive. Plenty of spoilers for that, by the way. Mulholland Drive, it turns out, is not a movie you're allowed to show clips of on YouTube, which was a wonderful thing to discover when I thought I was done editing. As a result, the YouTube version of this video essay has a slideshow quality to it that is very much not the intended artistic vision. The original version, the one where the motion pictures move, is free on my Patreon, link in the description. It's free, you don't have to subscribe, you should feel absolutely no pressure to subscribe, it's just a much better cut of the video. Also, as a heads up, this essay discusses suicide and substance abuse. With that out of the way, let's begin. Mulholland Drive, David Lynch's 2003 masterpiece, mostly follows Betty Elms, an aspiring actress played by Naomi Watts. But towards the beginning of the film, for 5 iconic minutes, it switches to beloved character actor Patrick Fischler as some guy named Dan. Dan is a nervous, sweaty young man. You have not seen him before. You will not see him again. The whole thing is self-contained to the point of non sequitur. But as little as it has to do with the film's main story, it sets the tone for everything that follows. Dan and his therapist are at a diner called Winkies because, Dan explains, he had a dream that they were there. 2 dreams, both the same, and each just like this. This diner, this table, this seat. The only thing that's different is the light. The dream was in a half night, but here it is solidly, blandly morning, cast in a dingy brightness, light like a hangover. In the dream, Dan and the therapist are scared out of their minds. They're scared because there's a man behind the diner, a man Dan can see through the walls. He's the one doing it, Dan says. And though Dan doesn't explain what the man is doing, or why he's so terrifying, or even what he looks like, he does say this.
I hope that I never see that face, ever outside of a dream.
So Dan wants to check. He wants to make sure that the man isn't actually behind Winkies, that he's silly to be so worried, that it was all a dream and the dream stayed a dream. So he and his therapist go out back. The scene that follows, 2 guys walking towards a dumpster, shouldn't be scary. It's shot in full daylight, in a public place with a busy street visible. There is not a trail of blood leading to the dumpster. There is not an ominous score telling us something is wrong. There's Dan's dream, the thing that scares him so much, but everything else about the scene is so grimily ordinary that his dream shouldn't affect us. It should feel as silly as any dream does in the morning. It doesn't. The camera lopes across the lot. It cuts between looking at Dan and Fischler's sublimely clammy face and looking as Dan, taking his perspective, unsteady and halting. It stalls looking at a payphone. It lingers on a door sign. When he goes down a set of stairs, the shot feels like it's about to topple. At one point, Dan turns back to look at his therapist, clearly aware of how ridiculous this is and clearly scared beyond belief. There's no music, but as they get closer to the dumpster, the ambient noises start to register as pressure. Dan's pace slows. The camera lingers on the empty space. There is nothing there. There is nothing there. There is nothing there. And then there is. The man from the dream is behind the dumpster, and Dan, seeing him, crumples. You can imagine what Dan was hoping for. That he would round the corner, the man would not be there, and the fear would leave him in a rush. It would be the relief of waking from a bad dream, the realization that it was just a dream, that none of it happened, certainly not to you. But it did happen. The man was there. And as terrifying as his face was in the half-night of Dan's nightmares, it's in the wan strip mall daylight that it destroys him. Dan went to face the dream and found it had become real in the worst way. And yet, he walked towards it. Why do Arena and Hayeda look the same? In most of Elden Ring's mysteries, the mystery comes from the missing pieces. The game places giant skeletons atop giant thrones, but offers no further explanation of why they're there. It alludes to the title of Gloam-Eyed Queen, but refuses to tell you who holds it. It talks, often and in reverent tones, of the demigod Miquella, but when you finally find them, you see only a single, inert arm. These are, even at the game's end, open questions, but they are open to potential answers. The skeletons could be giant carcasses from Marika's War or homunculi fashioned from Quicksilver. The Gloam-Eyed Queen could be Melina or Ranni or Rena or no one. Miquella could be almost anything, and it seems like the DLC will tell us what. These are mysteries rich with possibility, welcoming the player to speculate and intuit, a hypertext of many options with no single path. But Irina and Hayeda are different. They are two distinct characters who share a face and voice, but nothing from either of their stories explains why or how they do. And then they both die, and the chance for explanations dies with them. This is not a mystery made from missing pieces. It gives you all the pieces, but they don't fit together. Instead of endless possible solutions for players to debate, every solution has something to contradict it. One woman simply and suddenly becomes the other in a way that seems outside any of this universe's rules. It is confounding. It is frustrating. It makes me mad. And I cannot stop thinking about it. I will be upfront on this. I do not know how Irina and Hayeda look the same. But I do know why. Early in the game, you may encounter Irina, a blind young woman by the side of the road. She explains that she fled from Castle Morn to the south because the beast people they had enslaved rose up in revolt, which, good for them. She is waiting for her father Edgar, Morn's Castellan, who wants to join her but is honor-bound to remain until the castle's heirloom sword is safe. Irina worries, though, so she asks if you can deliver a letter to him. You agree, reluctantly, but hey, a quest is a quest. When you arrive, you see that the Misbegotten have indeed rebelled against the humans. You meet Edgar, and he says he wants to join his daughter, but it's his solemn duty to stay at the castle until you recover the ancestral sword. You do that, political implications aside, it's a free sword, and Edgar expresses his gratitude. Now he can go to Irina. He can protect her. He can, once more, see her smiling face. Oh, god damn it. While you were off clearing the castle and Edgar was very solemnly allowing you to do that, Irina met her end by assailants unknown. Edgar, in grief over what he must know he is responsible for, swears a sort of scattershot vengeance. When you see him next, it is at the aptly named Revenger's Shack, filled with the remains of his marks. Without a word, he attacks you. You put him down and take his halberd, already partially upgraded. And that's it. That's the entirety of Irina's story. And what a bad story it is, short and cruel, with an abrupt and brutal end. It may be Irina's story, but she is never its author, buffeted by forces beyond her control, doing what she is told until doing so kills her. She pays for the sins of her father, his subjugation of the Misbegotten, and his hubris that he could save honor and daughter both. And when she dies, it is not as hero or martyr. It's in a ditch, the killer nameless, and does nothing but further her father's ruin. By following her quest, you cannot save her, only bear witness to her suffering. But you are not even a good witness, and a quest this early and this disconnected from the rest of the events in a game this long? You'll forget her before you reach the halfway mark. If you do, by chance, think of Irina again, it's easy to imagine her realizing what a pitiful death she is about to have. To picture her sitting by the side of the road in the soft breath of drizzle and mist, hearing footsteps approaching, hoping that it is her father come to rescue her, to bring comfort and safety and reassurance, to tell her that she made the right decision, even if she had not known she was making a decision at the time. But the footsteps get closer, and she realizes they are not from a knight's riding boots, but a misbegotten's talons scraping against the bricks. And what approaches is not comfort or safety or reassurance, but clarity. Terrible clarity. The rebel who wrest control of their life by force and fury, showing Irina that she had not done that, will not ever do that, because now Now, as the blade swings down, she is all that she will ever be. And then you see her alive again like 4 hours later. To the north, in Liurnia of the Lakes, you may encounter Hayeda, a blind young woman by the side of the road. She has Irina's exact character model, but with a shawl. She even has the same voice actress, Claire Corbett, doing basically the same voice. She is aggressively and obviously the same person as Irina, but the game refuses to acknowledge it. Hayeda introduces herself as if you have never met. She doesn't say anything like she's here visiting her identical cousin down in Castle Morn. For your character's part, you can't say, "Hey, didn't I see your intestines earlier?" You may think that this is because the game doesn't know if you've met Irina before, but Hayeda only appears if you've seen Irina die. Elden Ring knows that you know, and it dares you to say something. Still, you follow Hayeda's questline. She is an aspiring finger maiden, an oracle of the two fingers that conveys the outer god's will. She doesn't know how to become one, but as she eats shabriri grapes, which turns out are just human eyes, she sees a distant guiding fire grow closer. She asks you to bring her more grapes, and you do. A quest is a quest, but when you explain what they really are, she's horrified, tries to remain strong, and retches when you walk away. Her resolve is not broken, though, and if you meet her again, she has realized she will be a finger maiden, but not of the two fingers and the gilded brutality they represent. Hey, check out this other video if you want to hear more about that. But the three fingers, keepers of the frenzied flame, an acid yellow fire that burns so hot and hungry it would unite the world in ash. And if you follow her quest to its end and become yourself the vessel of the flame, Hayeda is rewarded for her devotion. The fires consume her, and she dies in the ecstasy of holy terror. You'll notice that none of this connects to Irina. There's no mention of Castle Morn. The plight of the misbegotten is absent. The political realities of Irina's questline are replaced with a grand cosmic drama. And instead of a story about how duty can tear you from love with a hollow promise, Hayeda's is a duty fulfilled and vindicated. The sole explicit link between them is that, when you defeat Edgar at the Revenger's shack, he drops a shabriri grape to give Hayeda. And that's why this mystery is maddening. The connection between Irina and Hayeda could hardly be more explicit. They look and sound exactly the same, and are mechanically intertwined enough that you cannot find one without the other. And yet, why they're so conspicuously connected is totally obscured. There's no obvious narrative or thematic reason why Elden Ring wants you to think of these characters together, but the game makes it impossible not to. It draws your attention to the link, refuses to elaborate, and leaves both characters dead, any chance of explanation cauterized. As players have dug deeper into this, there's one theory that very nearly explains it all. At a different point in the game, you may encounter Shabriri, from the grapes. He is a reviled historical figure who, like Hayeda, is associated with the frenzied flame. Also, he's long dead, and because he's so dead, he's possessing the body of Yura, another otherwise totally unrelated NPC who died at the end of his own quest. The dots start to connect. If Shabriri's allegiance to the three fingers lets him possess random corpses, why couldn't Hayeda's? Remember, Irina has to die in order for Hayeda to show up, maybe because Hayeda is an inhabiting spirit in Irina's dead body. It would explain why they look and sound identical to each other, but why Hayeda doesn't know you. She just got here. It's an elegant solution that fits into the larger lore. Case closed, right? But there are some issues. First, when Shabriri possesses a guy, he is well aware of what he's doing and upfront with you about doing it. But if Hayeda knows she's a ghost, she never so much as hints it to you, talking about a life that seems to stretch long before her quest started, and with no mention of dying in the middle. And yeah, she could be lying, but through the rest of her questline she's either so candid or so bad at keeping things hidden that this sort of grand deception doesn't feel right, especially without a cackling reveal at the end. Maybe she doesn't know that she took over this corpse, that Shabriri is just far more used to body hopping, and that's possible, of course, but if she did steal Irina's body, why is Irina's body still there? To get Hayeda to spawn, Irina needs to die on the roadside of the Weeping Peninsula. But if you return to that roadside at any point in Hayeda's questline, Irina's body will still be there. By contrast, the corpse of the guy Shabriri inhabits despawns by the time you meet Shabriri. Whatever frenzied flame magic he's using, it doesn't copy the corpse it takes just takes it. That's clearly not the case with Arena, her carcass taunting you as it refuses to disappear. There's another explanation that's plausible, though a bit of a bummer. That the similarities between Arena and Hayeda are just a case of reusing assets and talent with no further significance in the fiction. FromSoft already had a model and VA for a young woman with Arena, so when they introduced Hayeda, they gave her a shawl and called it a day. It's especially plausible because Hayeda appears to be a late addition to the game. The Frenzied Flame questline was originally going to follow the merchant Kale, the scrawny Santa guy you meet right at the start, and they got far enough with that quest to have written and recorded dialogue for it. When FromSoft decided, for whatever reason, to rework the story with a release date looming, it seems perfectly reasonable that they would use resources and actors already involved in the project. But even if that is the reason that Arena and Hayeda are virtually identical, even if the intent of that creative decision was purely functional, their connection remains a part of the experience. The mystery of their resemblance is still there for players to puzzle over. It is so blatant that you can't just ignore it. And because you can't ignore it, and you can't explain it, its incoherence is nettlingly frustrating. The one logic that Arena and Hayeda's inexplicable link does seem to follow is dream logic. Now, usually when I say dream logic, I'm just using a fancy word for weird, but here I mean something very specific. In dreams, your brain will take a memory and turn it into something wholly unrelated. You'll dream that you're in your grandmother's house, and you'll know with certainty that it's your grandmother's house, but on waking you realize you were picturing the furniture section of a Target. You go to Subway, and in your home invasion nightmare, it's your sandwich artist brandishing an axe. You will dream of your childhood best friend, and know only when you awaken that they had Ted Bundy's face. Sometimes these dream transformations speak to some intuitive link in your subconscious. Sometimes they are completely random and totally meaningless. But within the dream, the transformation is total. The identity of something becomes disconnected from its constituent parts. And there is escape in that transformation when it is you who transforms. You fall asleep with guilt and grief, but the you in your dream has done nothing wrong and lost nothing of importance. Or the reverse, a nightmare where you piss the bed or stab someone in the throat, and the rush of relief when you wake to dry sheets and clean hands. That your biography, memory, and sins can suddenly go away, replaced by something else, is the sweetest and cruelest promise of the dream. Yes, the old truism is maddeningly true. Wherever you go, there you are, except in the dream. And Arena, with her biography and memory and sins, her awful ended story, wouldn't she want that escape more than anyone? To become, through means unclear, Hayeda, not so much to be Hayeda, but to stop being Arena? In that case, the complete disconnect between her story and Hayeda's is very much the point. Hayeda never encounters any misbegotten because that would drag Arena back to herself. Hayeda is not bound by the local politics of a crumbling feudal order, but by the laws scrawled between the stars. Hayeda's blindness is not a mundane fact, but a sign of her destiny. Hayeda is at the center of her story, and she drives its direction, and when Edgar appears, it is as nothing more than a fetch quest. So Arena, in her final moments, sends a desperate prayer to anyone who would listen, and the flame answers. Mulholland Drive primarily follows Betty Elms, a bright-eyed but fiercely talented young actress. She flies in to house-sit her aunt's place in Hollywood, but when she gets there, an amnesiac brunette has already broken in. Calling herself Rita, the brunette is a woman in trouble. She narrowly escaped a murder attempt and car crash, stumbling from the wreckage looking for a place to stay. In Rita's purse, there is no identifying information but hundreds of thousands of dollars in unmarked bills. She is wounded and rattled and wrapped up in a deadly showbiz conspiracy, and Betty immediately takes up the role of her protector and detective, caring for Rita and vowing to unravel the mystery she brings with her. She does this with plucky enthusiasm. When Betty suggests they try to ferret out some information by making an anonymous call to the cops, she says, excitedly, "It'll be just like the movies. We'll pretend to be someone else." Eventually, Rita has the barest fragment of a memory. It's just a name, Diane Selwyn, nothing more. "Maybe you're Diane Selwyn," Betty suggests. So they look Diane up in the phone book and go to her apartment. There's no answer and the door is locked, but Betty, bright-eyed and dogged, breaks in, just like the movies. She immediately holds her nose, though. The smell inside is awful. You know where this is going. Back at Betty's aunt's, Rita, panicked, starts cutting her hair. She thinks the same people who are after her killed Diane. She thinks she's next. So she lops off her hair so she won't be as recognizable. So she'll look like someone else. Betty lays her hands on Rita's. "I know what you need to do," Betty says. "Let me do it for you." She cuts off enough that Rita can fit into a short blonde wig. You may, in passing, notice that this makes her look like Betty. That night, Betty invites Rita into her bed, innocently. You don't have to sleep on the couch. After some polite protest, Rita joins her. There's awkwardness and tenderness in the way Betty scooches over. And when she kisses Rita, it's with all the nerves of a first kiss. "Have you ever done this before?" Betty asks. Rita, the amnesiac, says with a hint of a smile that she doesn't remember. And then everything changes. The story now follows Diane Selwyn, inexplicably alive and inexplicably identical to Betty. Only Diane's eyes aren't as bright. She's not as talented or hopeful as Betty, not an aspiring actress so much as an aspired one. And Rita, far from being Diane's charge and mystery, a budding, gentle romance, a future of possibilities, is a mundanely sad past. Diane's ex or just an unrequited love. Either way, Rita is Diane's obsession, and when Rita announces her engagement to someone else in a public and potentially cruel way, Diane breaks. She hires a hitman to take out Rita. If Diane's story with Rita has ended, she will end Rita's story entirely. When the rage behind this decision fades, and Diane is sitting alone in her dark apartment, heavy with the knowledge that the act is done and she has done it, she turns a gun on herself. And as the bullet shatters bone and punctures brain tissue, she has a wonderful deathbed dream where she did nothing terrible and lost nothing of importance, and her story was only just beginning. Everything we saw with Betty is Diane's dream, and it feels like a dream. The disjointed structure, the repurposed faces, the seductive, vindictive fantasy of it. Betty's career is burgeoning. Her life is ahead of her. Bad things happen to people who have wronged her, and Rita needs her in a way that Rita does not need Diane. Diane is still there in the dream, still dead, still riddled with sins, but that all happened to someone else. For Betty, Diane is just a piece of a mystery that could mean anything. There is no past yet, just a blooming future. There's much in the movie's first half that contributes to this blooming. We've talked about Betty and Rita, and we've talked about Dan and the Man Behind Winkies, but the first acts are filled with dangling plot threads and strange asides. A hitman is bad at his job. A cowboy politely threatens someone. Billy Ray Cyrus cucks a guy. Some of these are classic Lynchian one-scene weirdos, a pair of mob brothers spitting up espresso and screaming for help during a shakedown. Others feel like aborted storylines. Mr. Roke, a sinister figure behind glass and wrapped in darkness, looms large at the beginning and disappears by the end. The first act opens up a mystery almost unsustainably large, using Betty and Rita as its focal point. And then, suddenly, jarringly, the film abandons it all. But Mulholland Drive was not made as a film, not at first. It was originally a pilot, David Lynch's big return to television, shot and pitched and delivered to the network. But the network hated it, so Lynch got everyone back to film more so they could do a theatrical release. The sharply divided narrative, Betty, and then, without warning, Diane, is at least in part a result of reworking the pilot into a feature. Had the network picked it up for series, it seems likely, or at least plausible, that the story would have played out in roughly the same way. But the same story over multiple seasons would have necessarily had a gentler narrative curve. The abruptness of the shift from Betty to Diane comes from repurposing a pilot, a burgeoning mystery designed to generate interest, into a standalone film tasked with answers. And that abruptness is part of what makes Mulholland Drive so good. Don't get me wrong, when I found out we could have had an entire series worth of this, I was notably sad for a couple of days. But the truncated nature, the hanging plot threads, and lurching shift from one reality to another makes it more effective as a dream. A dream is a mystery unblemished by answers, all compelling asides and weird shifts, a feeling of importance and possibility. And when you wake, that possibility dies, and all the things that seemed so fascinating are forgotten, and you are you again, with everything that you have done. Mulholland Drive, by building a beautiful world and then wrenching you out of it, captures the feeling of the dream's end, when the pull of wanting to see what will happen loses out to the thin, roomy light of an unwelcome morning. This is as close to an explanation as I have for what happened to Irina. That basically it's a Mulholland Drive situation. Like Diane, she arrives at the end of her story, and like Diane, she turns to the escape of a dream where she is someone else, new and unburdened. The transformation is not, for either woman, ever really explained mechanically, and that lack of explanation may come from purely practical concerns. All that we have for certain is a want so powerful that it changes the world around it with the suddenness and thoroughness of a dream. And though the pieces do not fit in any neat or coherent way, there is that want, uncomfortably recognizable. But there is a crucial difference between these stories. Diane wakes up as Diane. Betty is a dream, and the dream cannot survive the morning. If Hayeda is Irina's Betty, though, then there is never the return to Irina's sad reality. She stays instead as Hayeda, and when Hayeda dies in the flames of her conviction, it is Hayeda's conviction, not Irina's. She is the frenzied flame's truest believer, and through you she brings about its goals. The dream does not die like a dream. It burns like a human, fat as tallow and the smell of singed hair. But why does she believe so strongly in the frenzied flame? Why does the frenzied flame answer Irina's prayer to be not Irina? Because that is the promise of the flame. When Hayeda burns a martyr, she says the following:
"All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned, melted all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again."
This is the frenzied flame's pull. Why, despite its obvious evil and adolescent nihilism, it can find such devoted followers. The reasoning is that if suffering comes from things you have done and things you have lost, then maybe the problem is that there's a you at all to carry that burden alone. Burn away the you, your biography and memory and sins, and let the ashes mingle in the fire pit. A dream will let you be someone else for a time, but the flame, burning from one end of the universe to the other, will erase the very idea of a someone. And when the flame burns out, and all existence is a single cold funeral pyre, there will be no waking from the dream, because the dream's logic has been taken to its final, awful extreme. The dream has survived into the morning by extinguishing all light. I know why Irina becomes Hayeda. I know because the experience of playing her story crawled into my brain. I know because the lure of the frenzied flame is the escape from self, and so whatever the mechanics of her transformation, it makes sense that they would be granted by that flame. And I know because I have longed for a dream to be real, to leave myself behind and become someone else, and to have that last forever. And because I longed for it, I got it. And I know that it sears. My family has a long history of alcoholism. And so when I was young, I treated alcohol with a wariness that became a sort of fascination, like seeing a spider you can't reach and won't stop watching. I made a promise to my family not to drink, and I regularly had dreams of drinking, dreams whose central feature was not imagined drunkenness, but guilt that I had broken my promise. And then I would wake up, and realize that it had been just a dream, that it wasn't really me who did it, and practically bathe in the relief. Sobriety was harder in college. No one pressured me to drink, but there was the feeling of possibility, and that I was missing out on it. The parties, the experiences, the nighttime friendships, the stories, all happening without me as I, awkward, uncomfortable, sat in my dorm. I didn't go to parties sober because then it would be me there, the awkward and uncomfortable one, standing in a corner, waiting for some transcendent experience that would never come. I avoided alcohol, but I was fixated on it, by its promise of potential, by the idea of who I could be if I weren't so fucking scared all the time. And so my second year, I started drinking socially, swearing that I would do it responsibly. I got, to some extent, what I wanted from drinking. Waking life cast in a dream's haze, the blur making dorm room fluorescence feel like the soft quiver of candlelight. I had conversations with strangers that felt like connection, pure and deep. The night was a mystery in bloom, the night sky not empty but full of possibility. And through it all, I could leave myself behind, my fears, my inhibitions, the person I was and didn't much like. And if one drink got me further from what I wanted to escape, and 2 drinks further still, and 3, and more, and more. Substance abuse prevention campaigns tend to focus on the catastrophic, getting drunk and diving into a shallow pool, paralyzing yourself from the neck down, or swerving into oncoming traffic and hitting a family of 5 on a road trip. What it largely left out was the smaller shames, the social and scatological, relationships changing or ending without your memory of it, piss in your sheets, shit on the floor. The knowledge that people had seen a side of you that you did not, and the racing panic of wondering what you exposed or became. The mystery, the terrible mystery of your own life made suddenly fragmented, speculating or intuiting the rest of it. I would black out. The poet Kaveh Akbar describes addiction as the process of the substance replacing the person, and the blackout is a pure expression of this. It became the monkey's paw wish fulfillment, the truest escape from history and selfhood, a blank and dark transformation. I had finally drunk enough to become someone else. And then, as that person, I would wake. There is a familiar feeling to waking after a night of heavy drinking. The dim images and tattered memories, the fragments of stories and slurring of faces, the sense of else. It feels like waking from a dream. And with the waking comes the expected relief that none of it really happened, that you didn't go out, that you didn't get drunk, that you didn't lock yourself in your room with a kitchen knife, that you didn't kiss someone who wasn't your partner, that you didn't smash your head open on a bathroom wall and piss yourself in the ambulance, that this was all somebody else, that this was all just a dream. But the relief doesn't come. And then, groggy, hung over, you realize with a lurch that it will never come. Because you did it. You made the dream real. You escaped yourself completely. You became someone new. Like Arena, you transformed, completely, without a chance of going back. And the morning light burns an acid yellow. I do not know how Arena becomes Hayeda. I do not know the mechanics by which her desperate prayer was answered, how the frenzied flame heard it and made it so. But I do know why. In Zadie Smith's essay Joy, she classifies pleasure as something immediately gratifying, good food or a fascinating stranger's face, and joy as something more profound, something that is often, moment to moment, suffering. Love is a joy. Raising a family is a joy. Art is a joy. And while a pleasure is something to have, a joy is something to become, to embody, at least in part. Smith recounts going to a club where she took pills and got scared. She was separated from her friends, the club's desert of sweat and synths seemingly endless, when she heard the warm human voice of Q-Tip rapping, "Can I Kick It?" and a gaunt, friendly man emerged from the crowd, took her hands, and asked if she was feeling it. She named this man Smiley. His sole intention was to make sure she had a good time. We danced and danced, she writes, and gave ourselves up to joy. This experience, the hazy drug night, the song that seems to mean everything, the feeling of deep connection with a stranger, has a beauty to it. Smith writes, it might really have been joy if the next morning didn't always arrive. But it did. And she has this to say. What really destroyed the possibility that this had been joy was the replaying in one's mind of the actual events of the previous night, and the brutal recognition that every moment of sublimity, every conversation that had seemed to touch upon the meaning of life, every tune that had appeared to be a masterwork, had no substance whatsoever now, here, in the harsh light of the morning. The final indignity came when you dragged yourself from your bed and went into the living room. There, on your mother's sofa, in the place of that jester, spirit, animal, savior person that you thought you had met last night, someone had left a crushingly boring, skinny pillhead, already smoking a joint, who wanted to borrow 20 quid for a cab. For Smith, the fading joy in the morning light simply meant she needed to find her joy elsewhere. But others, perhaps Smiley, certainly me, came to a different conclusion. We realized that it wasn't the drug's fault that it all felt so shallow in the morning. It was the mornings. We just had to drink, to keep drinking, to soak ourselves in the dream so the dream would last forever. Because alcohol, pure enough, will burn, and the rum fire can be as bright as the dawning sun. But then it becomes the sun. The joy, the dream, the beauty, it all becomes real in the light, but so does the history and guilt. You longed for an escape, and you got it, but now you arrive. The dream let you be someone else. Now you are someone else, with their biography and memory and sins. The mystery is intact, ever growing, but the pieces do not fit in any neat way, and you are left with the confounding task of reconciling them within you. Your dream now obeys the grim laws of reality, of identity, and what you are in the morning is worse and cracked and yours. Hayeda is the end point. This transformation becomes eventually destruction. Irina wanted to be someone else, and that want was 2 steps removed from the apocalypse. The escape cannot last forever, and so to escape from yourself is, in metaphor and flesh, a type of death. Diane Selwyn, faced with Diane Selwyn, killed herself when the dream ended. But Hayeda, whose dream never faltered, engineered her death just the same. In neither case can the dream save us. It is a temporary reprieve that makes the real hurt even more, or it is simply a different real with different guilts. Your choice is in the light of day or the light of flame. No matter how hard you try to hide or flee, you will be known in that light. If you do think again of Irina, if she is still in there somewhere, watching as Hayeda melts and the world cracks from the heat, you may wonder what she makes of all this. If becoming, at last, the author of her story was worth it, if this is how that story ends. But we will not know that, because Irina is gone. Her wish was granted, and if the cost of that wish was too great, she was someone else by the time she had to pay it. Perhaps she was aware of everything Hayeda did. Perhaps Hayeda, in those final moments of agony and joy, remembered what she used to be. But it is too late for her. She learned what Dan had learned. On that day he woke in a thin and awful morning and went to confront the dream behind the diner, and in that morning light discovered, with finality, that the worst thing a dream can do is come true.